We'll go straight into the sermon.
From Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and brought their father a bad report about him. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a rich ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of corn out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered round mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more, because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to you, to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Jesus sold him by his brothers. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers, and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are, grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him.
Then he said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We will see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colours that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite trainers passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and I, where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colours, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognised it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him." Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard.
Thank you. May God bless the public reading of His Word. Let's pray together, and I'm going to offer just a bit of space for silence, as we're not having a 17-year-old boy, well, a man who is godly, who was the favourite out of a family of 12 brothers. Now, I suffer from middle child syndrome a little bit. I can imagine what it would be like to have 11 brothers and see that clearly that Joseph was the favourite. Joseph was the favourite because of his love for God and because of his obedience to both his family and also to God. He had a heart for what God is concerned for, and his father Jacob, he recognised and shown his favouritism towards Joseph because of that. I should say this morning as well, for the kids, there are some colouring in sheets, I think just on the back table, with some pens, so there's a variety, so you're welcome to go and do that, so you don't get bored when I'm speaking. And any adults, you're welcome. You're welcome to have that as well, that's better. So the brothers, they weren't anything like Joseph. It was interesting that Jacob, who was the son of Isaac, came from a family that was chosen by God. So the brothers came from a chosen family, but they didn't live up to the mark that they were called to live by, because they weren't focused on God in their lives. And we see in this passage that Joseph brought a bad report about them to Jacob, and this probably wasn't without good reason. So for the most part, the brothers were ungodly men. The brothers had envy and jealousy and hatred towards Joseph. First there was the bright coat of many colours that Jacob had given him. And then Joseph had this prophetic dream about how the brothers would one day bow down to him. Now I don't know about you, but could you imagine one of your siblings telling you that you were one day going to bow down to them? I'd be pretty annoyed as well. Their envy for Joseph slowly turned into jealousy, which then turned into this deep hatred for their brother. And because they lost a focus on God's purpose, they hated, and they had hatred for Joseph. It made them do an act which they would never have imagined that they would do. This morning, unfortunately, we don't have time to look at the whole story of Joseph, because it is over 7 chapters long, and I didn't think we'd appreciate looking at 7 chapters this morning and preaching on them as well. So I encourage you to look at this story. It's a story of suffering and jealousy and sin, but it's also a great story, a story in which God shows how He delivers people from sin and from hatred. But this morning we're going to look at 2 things in particular, and the first is jealousy and envy, and the second is deliverance. What we see most of all in this passage is the way that jealousy grows and manifests in the hearts of the brothers, because they absolutely hated him. 3 times in this passage it says the brothers hated him. Firstly, they saw that he was the favourite, and Jacob loved him more than any of the others, and his coat was a sign to show that. Secondly, he tells us about this dream, and it says that they hated him even more because Joseph told them that they would reign over him. And then through their little brothers ruling over them, that made them really envy, and that built up resentment in their heart. And then it gets a bit worse, because the envy and the jealousy continues to mount up. Later, Joseph is sent to find his brothers in Shechem, And that journey would have taken about 5 days from the valley of Hebron on a donkey. And then Joseph was redirected to Dothan to find his brothers. And on his approach, it says in verse 18, the brothers saw him in the distance, and before they reached them, they plotted to kill him. I suppose wearing a bright coat of many colours makes you quite noticeable from a distance. But this is where the hatred and the envy reaches its climax. The brothers' envy led them to try and destroy Joseph. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come, let's kill him and throw him into one of those pits and say a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we will see what will come of his dreams. But then Reuben, who's the oldest of the brothers, tells the others not to kill him, but to leave him in the desert. And Reuben's thought here we see in the passage is to rescue him and to take him back to his father. But I wonder why he decided to do that or suggest that. Perhaps he wanted to be the hero to gain a bit of favour with Jacob because he'd previously lost that because of his disobedience towards his father. But anyway, the rest agree to this plan. Joseph arrives, and they get him, stripping him of his coat and leaving him in a dark pit. And something which is interesting as well in the passage is it says that they ate their lunch because they obviously would have been a bit hungry after taking out their brother and throwing him into a pit. But you can imagine this picture. Joseph moaning and groaning a bit like Simon was earlier at the bottom of a pit whilst the brothers sat and ate. It's not a pleasant picture. Their hatred and jealousy for Joseph led them to this point. And as the traders travelled down to Egypt to buy and sell goods, they sold him as a slave for 20 shekels of silver, or 2 each, when the brothers divvied them up. Then Reuben comes back from tending the animals to save the day and to save Joseph, but when he came back, Joseph was gone. They tore his robe and made it look like he'd been killed. A lie in the face of everything else that had happened in this story. But what we see most of all in this passage, as I've said, is how the manifestation of sin is formed through our envy. Jesus in Mark in chapter 7 verses 21 to 22 says, From within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, ignorance, and folly. Galatians 5, 19 to 21, Paul says the acts of sinful nature are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. So I think we get the point that envy and jealousy is sinful, but the story of Joseph and his brothers brings that nature to life. It's a very real story. Envy is produced when the centre of someone's focus is themselves and not anyone else. And when this happens, it confuses what our reality is. When we constantly compare ourselves to others and who they are, then envy has that risk of taking over. And it's such a common thing. It happens in sibling rivalries, it happens in school, it happens in the workplace, it even happens between people in the church, because someone might feel, well, why are they getting to do that, or why is this person spending time with that person? Basically, where people lie, there's always the risk of envy towards others. And I think about my time at school, and at school I could become very envious of other people. Because I always wanted to be the cleverest person, to have the top marks, or to be seen as one of the cool people. And I would constantly compare myself to others who were maybe a bit cooler than me, or who are more clever. And it brought insecurity, and it meant that envy risked being there. Bear in mind, I didn't go on to kill anybody, I just want to make that clear. The envy was still there. And it was only until God worked through my insecurity that I learned just how much God loves each one of us. Just how God has made us to be who He wants us to be. God has made me with a purpose and a plan and a hope and a future. Just as He's made a purpose and a plan for the person that I'm trying to compare myself to. And I was asked a question by a youth leader at the church. He said this: do I want to see others as a threat? Or do I want to have a heart to see others succeed? It was a bit of a strong challenge on my reality at that point. As I mentioned before, the brothers lost purpose of God's plan for them. And when someone becomes the centre of their universe instead of God, it makes them very vulnerable to sin, for which envy can then take place. As soon as they let that envy take over, they lose all sense of God's perspective in their lives. And for the church today, this is something really important for us to think about. Because when, as a body of Christ, as individuals, when we are focused on God's purpose, then there's no room for envy. But as a church, when we lose purpose of God, then envy takes over. And we've seen that time and time again in different churches, that happen. Because it becomes about my recognition, backstabbing. Animosity is a risk. It's something that's in the history, sadly, of this church and others. When this becomes someone's purpose, then nothing is ever enough. Nor are we ever good enough. So instead of accepting who we are, we look to others and compare our failures to theirs. But yet, when our eyes are fixed towards God and His eternal goodness and His eternal mercy for us, then this won't happen. There's little room for envy because our focus is on the one who made us. Our focus is on the one who wants to deliver us from evil. I was reminded this morning of a story of a guy called Pete Gregg, who is the founder of 24/7 prayer. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But he had a purpose. God had given him a purpose to start this massive prayer movement all around the world. And it started in a small church. It started in a bit like the quiet room in our church building across the road. And his plan for that was just seeking God's will. There was nothing about him, there was nothing about anyone else. He said as long as it depended on God and depended on Him, then this would happen. And to cut a long story short, and there's a book called Dirty Glory, which is a fantastic book if you're interested in 24/7 prayer. They now have a full-time member of staff who go and speak to people in Ibiza, speaks to students, people who are going for different things. And it's a space to pray. And even in quite a lot of these clubs, they have a space where there's a prayer space like that. And so many churches work with that. But the reason I say that is because of his focus. His focus was on God. It was never on himself. If it was, it probably wouldn't have happened, he says. But his focus was on God. And it turned into this amazing thing all across the world. And next week, we think about Joseph. This godly man who, as a result of sinfulness of his brothers, was stuck in a pit. His brothers ate whilst he sat in the darkness of a pit. And they had no conscience of their actions. Then Joseph is sold for 20 pieces of silver. Yet in the story, in the whole story of Joseph, we see his constant obedience and trust in God. His focus was on God. His heart was concerned for what God's heart is concerned for. And interestingly, what the Israelites didn't know is they actually were giving him a lift towards God's purpose for him. Over the Sunday school in the last little while, the kids have been looking at the story of Joseph. And I wonder if any of the kids could tell me where Joseph ends up in his story. After he interprets someone's dreams, what happens to him? You're all focused on colouring in, so you're not listening to me. Does anyone know what happens to Joseph? No one? Brilliant. Well, we're going to watch a video anyway, and we're going to see what happens in this story.
We're walking through the book of Genesis, which is made up of these two main parts.
And the first part begins in the garden, where we watch humanity spiral downward in self-destruction, and it ends in the Tower of Babel, where a rebellious humanity is scattered by God.
Then the second part of Genesis zooms in and focuses on just one family.
And right in the middle is this story that links the two parts of Genesis together and helps us understand what the whole book is all about.
So how do we get from the Tower of Babel to this story here in the middle?
Well, after the scattering at Babel, there's this genealogy, and it follows one of the tribes all the way down to this one guy named Abram.
You probably know him as Abraham.
And God starts making all these promises to Abraham, like he's going to bless him and give him a ton of kids. And he says that through him and his family, all the nations of the earth are now going to find God's blessing. So basically, God is trying to restore humanity back to the goodness of the garden and to his original intentions for the world. So it's like his rescue plan for humanity. And that's why the whole second half of Genesis is about this one family. And so you have Abraham, and then he has a son Isaac, who has Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons. And each generation, God renews his promise to bless them and all nations through them.
So because of this promise to use this family to rescue the world, it's pretty easy to read these stories as examples of how to be a good person.
But actually, for the most part, this family is totally dysfunctional. So for example, let's go back to Abraham. This whole story is about God giving him and his wife Sarah a family, but two different times. He basically gives Sarah away to other men by denying that she's even his wife. And then Sarah gets impatient about having a son, and so she makes Abraham sleep with her servant girl, which then causes all of these other problems in the family.
So they get really old, and you begin to think that there's no way they're going to have a kid of their own. But then, miraculously, they do. It's Isaac.
And Isaac, he has two sons, Esau and Jacob, and it seems like things are going pretty good.
But Jacob, the younger brother, wants the family's inheritance, which belongs to Esau, the older brother. So he devises a plan where he's going to steal it from his father, Isaac, who at this point in the story is now old and blind.
Which, who does that? Horrible, stealing from your blind father.
Yeah, and then he just takes off.
So Jacob goes on from there to have 12 sons, big family. But Jacob loves his 11th son, Joseph, way more than all the others. And so he gives him the special Technicolor dream coat. And his brothers, because of this, come to hate him.
So much so that they plan on killing him.
But they don't. They instead just sell him as a slave down in Egypt.
Now, while in Egypt, through this crazy series of events, Joseph goes from being in a prison cell to becoming the second in command there.
And so later on, the whole Middle East falls into this food shortage. And Joseph's brothers, they come down to Egypt looking for food. And then when they get there, who should they find as the ruler of the whole land?
It's Joseph, that guy they sold into slavery. But he actually saves them from starving to death.
And so here you have it. These are the great-grandchildren of Abraham who have done this heinous act to their brother. But God has transformed their evil into something good.
And that's exactly what Joseph says here in the last paragraph of the entire book. He says, you guys planned all of this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save people's lives.
Now these words, they conclude the book because they actually summarize the message of the whole story so far. Humans keep choosing evil, and we are thinking they're screwing up God's plan, but he keeps turning their evil back into good. And somehow, he's going to use this family to restore humanity back to the garden.
There we go. And that's a Bible project video. If you're ever looking for some good materials for introductions to the Bible, then the Bible project, I can't recommend them enough. So the video said God transformed evil for good. And in this story, God delivers Joseph and uses him to save a whole nation from starvation. God brings Joseph out of the pit, protects him on his journey, and if you read on, and as the video kind of hinted to, it's still filled with more trial. Yet in amongst all of his suffering, God's hand was guiding Joseph to providence that only God could take him on. For some of us in our journey with God, we might feel like we're in a pit, in that pit stage of our journey with God. For Joseph, there were years of preparation and testing, sold as a slave, but sent to serve God, to take part in his plan for the world. There's a psalm, it's Psalm 105, 16 to 20. It says, God called down famine on the land and destroyed all of their supplies of food. And he sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles, his neck was put in iron, till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord provided true. The king sent him and released him. The ruler of peoples set him free. So I wonder, what does this look like in our lives today? Well, for us, we might be on a similar journey as Joseph. Perhaps not with the same narrative, I hope not. The same narrative, the same situation as Joseph. But in our lives, it's important to think about what our focus is on. Is it ourselves? If so, then the reality of envy is tempting. Comparing ourselves to others ruin us, and our insecurity and our focus becomes so destructive in our lives. We may do things that we would never imagine we would do. Perhaps things we'd later regret, a bit like the brothers did. Or is our focus on God's purpose in our lives? If so, then the temptation of envy and to compare ourselves to others is still there. But when we trust in God, which is higher than anything else, when we have a heart that is obedient for God's will for us, then there isn't any room for envy in our lives. An important challenge this morning. As we close, I wanted to leave a bit of time for reflection, a bit of space to think. It's a family service, so we'll try and do something a bit new. So down the front, we have a pit. Well, it's not a pit, it's one of our recycling bins from the church. But it has pit on it, so we'll pretend it is a pit. And you each have a bit of paper under your chair. And this pit is a bit like the one that Joseph was in. Well, it definitely wasn't, but you know what I mean. But my question to you this morning is there something that is holding you back from God's purpose or plan in your life? Or maybe this morning you feel like you're in that spiritual pit, that place that Joseph was in, where you're struggling, where you don't quite know what God is doing in my life right now. It's a difficult journey sometimes with God, but we remember who God is. So I'm going to play a bit of music, and you're welcome just to write something on your bit of paper. Is there something holding you back? Is there something you're struggling with? And I just want to invite time to pray for this situation. You could pray with one another, you could pray yourself, or you could just sit and listen to the music. And just reflect and pray for God's deliverance in that situation. And then after the service, or at some point during the teas and coffees, I invite you just to rip that bit of paper up in as many pieces as you like and throw it in the bin. I've just noticed it's the paper bin as well, so that was a good coincidence as well. But we're going to release what is holding us back from God this morning. And we're going to pray for deliverance for whatever we are struggling with. So I'm going to play the music where my phone is, and we'll just have a bit of time, and then I'll pray, and we'll go into communion.
On the nights when the dark lasts a little bit longer, when the wind stone is a little bit stronger. When the fear in my heart takes a little bit deeper. When my faith to stay gets a little bit weaker. Where could I run to? Where could I go? Even when it feels like my world is shaking, even when I've had all that I can take, I know you never let me go. And even when the waters won't stop rising, even when I'm caught in the dead of the night, I know no matter how it ends, you're with me, baby. Days up ahead look a little bit brighter. The grip of the past was a little bit tighter. I'm reminded your grace never asked for perfection. You were restored 'cause I'm yours and I stand forgiven. Even when it feels like my world is shaking, even when I've had all that I can take, I know you never let me go. And even when the waters won't stop rising, even when I'm caught in the dead of the night, I know no matter how it ends, you're with me, baby. And even in the middle of the struggle, and even when it's hard to remember, you will hold my fist when I'm standing on your promises, and I know that even in the thick of the battle, and even through the valley of the shadows, you will hold my fist when I'm standing on your promises. So where could I run to? Where could I go? Even when it feels like my world is shaking, and I have all that I can take, I know you never let me go. And even when the waters won't stop rising, even when I'm caught in the dead of the night, I know no matter how it ends, you're with me, baby. You're with me, no matter how it ends. You're with me, baby.
Let's pray together as we close. Lord God, thank you that you know each one of us. You know who we are, you know our struggles, you know what brings us joy. Thank you that we have hope in you. And Lord, when we rely on ourselves, then we are so vulnerable to fault. But yet, despite that, despite our mistakes, despite our failings, you love us. That you want to transform and change us through the Spirit of you. Thank you that you want to transform and shape us to have a mind for you. And we ask that in whatever is put us in that pit, whatever we're struggling with, would you release us from that? Would you bring deliverance in situations where we need that? Would you release us from sin and the chains that are bringing us down? And would you allow us to be free? Like you freed Joseph. And ultimately we thank you for eternal life. We thank you that you have died on the cross for us. So in the end that we can be delivered. If it's not on this earth, then ultimately and eternally with you. We give you thanks for that. In your name. Amen.
We're going to
Liam to join me. And I would ask Liam to give thanks for the bread and Marion to give thanks for the cup. I'm just going to start though by reading Luke 22 from verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread in which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare for it?" they asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." They left and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took bread and gave thanks. So Liam's going to give thanks for the bread.
Lord God, we give you thanks for this time together and sharing in your Lord's Supper. Thank you for the reminder that it is that you have given us life and given us hope. That you have prepared a place for us, and when we choose to follow you in the upper room, which is heaven. Thank you for that. Thank you for your love for us, so that we can have that. Although we fail, yet your grace, your love lifts us up. And we give you thanks for that in your name. Amen.
And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it. And said to them, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Let's share in the bread together. And as the plate goes past, you can break it off and eat it.
Mm.